ask now all people who are not speaking as speakers at the moment, please mute your microphones. We will afterwards have the discussion and then you can unmute yourself. But for the moment, please, to avoid a lot of additional noises, we would kindly ask you to mute the microphones now, because I think we soon will start. And yeah, we welcome you all, and more people coming in to our first talk, DCZ talk on urban agriculture. And before we start, because it's the first in this series, I like to invite our managing director, Dr. Jürgen Ritter, to say a few words. Yeah, please, Dr. Ritter.
All right. So, a good day to everybody. In the name of the Sino-German Agriculture Center and of our partners from the Foreign Economic Cooperation Center, I welcome all of you to our first event in this new format, which we call the DCZ Talks. DCZ, for the people who don't know us that well, is the abbreviation of the German name of the Sino-German Agricultural Center. In this format, we plan to address interesting topics in the fields of agriculture, food, rural development, and so on, through roundtable discussions and lectures with distinguished experts. We expect this to be a regular event, about every 2 months, and we are also glad to receive your feedback and also your suggestions for any topics. In order to avoid that the DCZ Talks becomes an event in which mainly the DCZ talks, I instantly hand back now to my colleague Eva Stanfeld, who will introduce today's topic and experts. I wish all of us an inspiring exchange. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jürgen Ritter. Yeah, as I said already, we will have, we are looking forward to the presentations of our 3 distinguished guests, and then afterwards we invite you all for a Q&A. You are also kindly invited to write already your questions and commentaries into the chat, and my colleagues Ahmadjan Rote and Dr. Michaela Böhme will also take care of the questions in case we have to read them out later. As Jürgen already said, today's topic is urban agriculture, and this is a topic in the context of the central topics of our bilateral dialogue on food security and climate change. When we look back into the history, in Beijing in the 18th century was the largest city of the world, and at that time it took probably 10 million farmers to feed 1 million city dwellers. And we have to keep in mind it wouldn't be possible at that time in Europe. Chinese agriculture at that time was the most productive in the world. And if we look into the future, by 2030, it's expected that as well in Germany and as well as in China, about 80% of the population will live in cities. And as a matter of fact, the urban sprawl has eaten up a lot of fertile farmland, which is natural because people settle there where the most fertile areas is, where they can find food. And so we look in these kind of questions, how can we find enough food for the urban population? How can we secure this food? How do we create a climate resilient cultivation? How do we avoid transportation costs and emissions caused by transport? And what is not finally, but of all, also the added value for urban agriculture and urban gardening for the urban population? How can urban dwellers regain trust in the food they eat, and how they can be reconnected to nature? How we can incorporate these aspects of urban into urban design? So you see, there is a lot of questions, and I took them already from a former event we had organized in December in collaboration with the CAAS, the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Sciences International Department, and the CAAS Institute for Urban Agriculture, where also one of our presenters, Dr. Fei Shulang, is working at. And at that time, we invited German and Chinese experts to an international exchange forum on the state of research on urban agriculture in both countries. And this was more an internal workshop, and we found it so interesting, and we started so interesting discussions that we thought we would like to open it up to a broader audience. And today we invited 3 of these experts to share their findings. And I like, before we start with their presentations, I like to introduce them first. We have the first speaker will be Dr. Rita Merkle. She is an independent consultant having more than 20 years of experience in strategic support of public decision-making, with a focus on sustainable and integrated rural development, climate change, agriculture policies, and gender equality. She works for public sector organizations, both in Germany and Europe. She is based in France right now, and also internationally. And she has a lot of experience working with China. And currently she is working for the EU program, International Urban and Rural Cooperation, IURC, and there she is a cluster manager for sustainable and innovative urban agriculture. Our second speaker will be Dr. Fei Shulang. She is an assistant professor at the Institute for Urban Agriculture of the Academy of Agricultural Sciences in Chengdu. She works in the urban food policy and planning team. She holds a bachelor degree from the China Agricultural University and earned her PhD at the University of Queensland in Australia. She's currently working as a principal investigator for the Global Comparative Study on Metropolis Urban Agriculture Development, which is one of the key research projects of CAAS. And prior to this, he has been also the principal investigator for global comparative studies on lessons learned from COVID-19, climate change, and other shocks and stresses on city region food systems. And finally, our third speaker, we are very happy to have Professor Katrin Bohn with us. She is an architect, urban practitioner, and academic, and her main research interest lies in the sustainable architectural and urban design, and centers around the concept of continuous productive urban landscapes, which she will introduce to us today. Already in 2005, she had a publication on the book also called Continuous Productive Urban Landscapes, Designing Urban Agriculture for Sustainable Cities. And then in 2014, She published another book with André Villon, and I'm very happy. I found it today. I saw it in the and I read it already. Very nice, interesting book. And yeah, without further ado, I will now hand over to our first speaker, and we're looking very much forward to the presentation of Rita Merkle, who we invited after our workshop in December to write a kind of report, not only on the outcomes of the workshop, but to provide a general overview what is going on in the field of urban agriculture and in China and in Germany or in Europe. And so please, Rita, I have the floor, the first speaker. And to everyone, if you have questions, comments, please already start writing, not to forget them for the final discussion round, please.
Okay. Eva, thank you very much for this introduction. So I can come directly to my presentation. I will share the screen with you. Where is it? This one here. I will make it. So can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I will present the study I did for DCZ. As Eva said, it was a follow-up activity of the, it was a follow-up activity of the Fourth Exchange Forum, which took place last December. And the objectives were, as Eva mentioned briefly, providing introduction to the concept and definitions of urban agriculture, analyzing the current state of knowledge in German and Chinese and European research, and identifying knowledge gaps and providing guidance for potential further cooperation between DCZ and IUA and other Chinese research institutes and German researchers. So, and then there were best practices given in this study also. Yeah, why urban agriculture? Urban agriculture has always existed. As you know, there were backyard gardens, keeping poultry or whatever, or growing vegetables. But if you see some figures, you understand that it has become a topic of sustainability, and like 55% of the world population now lives in cities. And as Eva said, this is projected to reach 80% by 2050 in China, and even in Germany, even 84% will be living in cities by that time. And 70% of all food at present is designed for consumption in cities, but only 15 to 20% of the world's food is produced in urban areas. So, and moreover, like 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions stem from food production and food distribution. So you understand why it has become very important, and it began to take root. Research on urban agriculture began to take root in the 1990s and has been a subject of significant research over the recent years. But there is no universally accepted definition so far. There are debates going on, and for example, on the delimitation of urban agriculture versus peri-urban agriculture or versus rural agriculture, discussions are going on. And for example, in Europe, a project funded by under the European Coast Action was conducted between 2012 and 2016, which aimed to gain deeper understanding of Europe's different forms of urban agriculture and to develop a common language in the field of urban agriculture research. And the project focused on the question of definition and developed also a typology of urban agriculture for Europe and gave examples and short case studies to demonstrate the diversity. Then by 2000, Luc Mougeot, a researcher affiliated to the International Development Research Center in Ottawa, Canada, provided definition which is now widely accepted and one of the most frequently cited definitions. His definition reflects the dynamic and multifunctional nature of urban agriculture, and it makes also reference to the concept of peri-urban agriculture taking place in the urban periphery, in the transition zone between inner city and rural areas. I will come back, and then I will come back to the typology later, but first I want to still present the latest publication, which also integrates urban the peri-urban dimension of urban agriculture. It was published by the FAO, RUAF and other in Récolte in 2022, the Urban and Peri-Urban Agriculture Sourcebook. It also integrates the peri-urban dimension and provides two definitions. A short one and a longer one. I will present you now the longer one. I will read the urban and peri-urban agriculture can be defined as practices that yield food and other outputs from agricultural production and related processes taking place on land and other spaces within cities and surrounding regions, involving urban and peri-urban actors, communities, methods, places, policies, institutions, systems, ecologies and economies, largely using and regenerating local resources to meet the changing needs of local populations while serving multiple goals and functions. So this definition also reflects this dynamic and multifunctional nature of urban agriculture and also integrates the peri-urban dimension. So when I'm talking now on urban agriculture, I always include it's in Europe, it's included also peri-urban agriculture when we talk about urban agriculture. In practice, you will see there is a very large scope and many different forms of urban agriculture which exist. They include different urban spaces. Can I see? Yeah. Like rooftops here, or like indoor farming, allotments. They include also different growing systems like hydroponics or vertical farming or soil-based agriculture. So we have, in practice, it's very, very diverse. Coming back to the typology, in the coast action, urban agriculture was differentiated between urban farming and urban gardening, with urban gardening having more social objectives at their heart, and urban farming also is based on business models. But it became clear over time that it's not enough to for example, sufficiently represent systems like vertical farming or indoor farming. So in the IFUA project, an update was made on the typology. Let me briefly talk about IFUA. IFUA means European Forum for a Comprehensive Vision on Urban Agriculture. It's a European Horizon 2020 program and is still running until October 2024. The objective of this project is to unlock urban agriculture's potential by achieving better knowledge, better deployment, and better policies in this field. So as you can see here, now they updated the first typology and now differentiate 6 categories, and each of these categories is then further analyzed along 4 dimensions like spatial, production, operational, and community dimensions. Just to give a short example, for zero acreage farm is, for example, a vertical farm is part of this category. How about typologies in China? In China, urban agriculture, in China, coordinated and networked vision for urban agriculture is just at the starting point with the establishment of the Urban Institute of Urban Agriculture, which was founded in 2018 under CAAS based in Chengdu. But urban agriculture within the Chinese agricultural discourse and policies is fraught with uncertainty because first they dichotomized land use categories, rural land versus urban land, which shapes the access of residents to land for agricultural purposes, and present food production in urban areas. And then secondly, policies aim to make cities in more urban and rural areas more like the countryside, while at the same time, the state's urban modern agriculture emphasizes only peri-urban regions for robust domestic production and multifunctional urban agriculture. So this is what Lure and others in the study, which is mentioned here, what they find out. And to date, to my knowledge, only these researchers, which I just mentioned, they are from Waterloo University in Canada. They try to develop a typology of urban agriculture in China, and they distinguish 3 forms of urban agriculture: small-scale intra-urban agriculture, intra-urban capital-intensive agriculture, and peri-urban agrotourism farms. I won't go into more detail on these, just let me mention, since Dr. Pantau is present, I just want to say that Dr. Pantau, he has a project, he has a farm which is called Ecoland Club Farm in Shanghai, which started in 2010 and which would be a form of urban farm belonging to this 3rd category. Well, we can talk about this later in the discussion. Then let me just introduce one more study which was conducted by Payen and colleagues from Lancaster University in the UK. And they, along 3 categories, they observed urban agriculture studies. They looked at the type of crop grown, which were based on FAO-Stat categories. They looked at the urban space used for food production. They distinguished 2 broad categories: gray spaces and green spaces, which were then further distinguished. And they looked at the characteristics of the growing systems with 3 aspects of growing system on yields. And they found out, why is it so? Why do I mention this study? Because it helps really to understand the contribution of urban agriculture to food security and food resilience. And for example, one of their 2 main conclusions were urban areas have high economic suitability, with the urban agriculture yields being, for example, for the categories of roots and tubers, of oil crops, of vegetables primaries. The yields for those categories are more than twice as high as conventional yields. And another conclusion is then that, however, nevertheless, they are unable to observe an overall trend, and yields in urban spaces differ significantly between certain urban spaces and between the growing systems. For example, for several crops, specific urban spaces and growing systems led to higher crop yields than others. This is the case for lettuce and chicory. They have higher yields in vertical farming, hydroponic systems, and CEA with artificial light. So this is a very interesting study which makes a real link to food security and food resilience. And what is going on in what is the state of knowledge and research on urban agriculture in Europe and Germany? There is at present, we have a very vast thematic scope of research going on. In the beginnings, in the 2000s, research focused on the phenomenon in developing countries, and then it gradually changed to look at it in response to rural-urban pressures. And at present, well, they look at solution-oriented approaches to climate change, related nature-based solutions. They look at the city-region food system. They look at technological solutions. They look at multi-actor governance models. And in Europe, for instance, you have under Horizon 2020, 28 projects were funded linked to urban agriculture, and one of them being the EFUA project, which is still running. And under the present Horizon Europe program, you have also several projects linked to UPA, for example, in Cluster 6, just to give you an impression of what they are dealing about. One program is called Integrated Urban Food System Policies, how cities and towns can transform food systems for co-benefits. This is already closed, this call, and another forthcoming call will be on cultured meat and cultured seafood, state of play and future prospects in the EU. Well, all this vast thematic scope, you can find it also in German research, and some German institutes are, of course, involved in those European research programs, and this vast thematic scope finds its reflection in a very scattered research landscape in Germany. And what is also important to say, that research in Europe has in the meantime entered the planning level in Europe. How about in China? In China, as mentioned before, the IUA was founded under CAAS, and IUA in China, in the December workshop, it was explained that urban agriculture is seen crucial for making China's food system more resilient and producing sufficient food with the limited sources available. The institute focuses on high-tech solutions in 5 departments, and there is one department where Mrs. Fei is affiliated on the theory and planning of urban agriculture. And then, as in Germany, other research on urban agriculture, of course, is existing and is also very scattered. Well, as said before, so an impressive work has been done so far to understand the spatial characteristics, the production features, operational parameters, social dimensions of urban agriculture. Nevertheless, further research is needed. I will just present some issues which would need further understanding. For urban agriculture in general, the productive potential of different urban food production systems and the agronomic sustainability, the uncertainty regarding the sustainability of urban production and how it may vary depending on where and how crops are grown. And then in China, for example, the terminology needs further investigation. When it comes to vertical farming, well, its cost effectiveness, its scalability, its environmental sustainability, its social acceptance needs further understanding. For CEA, which is very much needed, is more research on food quality in CEA, or sustainable energy supply for new renewable sources in CEA, and so on. When it comes to food policy and urban landscape planning, the planning processes to integrate food productive infrastructure in urban environments needs more understanding, and the effectiveness of different food policy instruments and appropriated mixes are still to be further investigated. And just a last issue when it comes to urban agriculture heritage. We know not very much about qualities of inherited and vernacular systems of urban agriculture production and its benefits. And for China specifically, how to integrate traditional symbiotic agriculture production systems in the urban landscape, like, for example, the Mulberry Dyke fish pond system, which Mrs. Bohn, she has also worked on it, and we can discuss about this later. And then I think I have already talked a lot. I would like to present you best practice, but I will just switch over it rapidly. We have in Germany allotment gardens. We have productive parks. We have best examples in vertical farming, the in-farm company. In Europe, we have, for example, Paris as a forerunner for rooftop gardens, and so on and so on. You can find all these, You can find all these best examples in the study, and I invite you to read it, and then we can discuss about it later with all of you. Thank you for your attention, and I will pass now the mic. I will pass over to Eva again. Thank you. So, thank you. Eva, your microphone is switched off.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Rita, for the introduction into the series of urban agriculture. And we see already, we get an impression that there's many facets and many forms of what we could call urban agriculture. And you also told us the knowledge gaps we still have, and the problems, challenges that might occur, but also please, to everyone, keep your questions in mind to doctors. I see already somebody has a question typed in, and follow my colleague Michaela's and write your questions into the chat. And first, I would like to give the floor to our last speaker and invite Professor Dr. Katrin Bohn from the University of Brighton to give us her insights in what is the continuous productive urban landscape. Please.
Thanks a lot, Eva. First of all, I don't hold a PhD, so whilst I have a professorship, I'm not a doctor, but just so that this is clear, which is not unusual for architects in Europe, which is also just to state again who I am. I will share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
And please also, if possible, full screen.
Yeah, I try.
It's always. Yeah.
Can you see?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, good. So as Dr. Sternfeld already introduced, I have been asked to talk about this concept, continuous productive urban landscapes. and also set it into relation with Rita Merkle's report. So I'm trying to do this in 10 to 15 minutes. So please, I will only touch upon the idea of this urban design concept. If there are questions, then let's discuss those later on. This will be the first part of my talk. And the second part is indeed trying to extract some of the suggestions that Rita makes in her report and how one may be working with that in the future. So the continuous productive urban landscape is it's a design concept, i.e. it is a theoretical, research-based, design research-based concept that aims to people to understand how can we think about food in the city, how can we conceptually think about it, and how could it work to integrate food productive spaces and food system activities into cities. Now, because Rita gave us a timeline of urban agriculture, just to say this idea of the continuous productive urban landscapes, it is now not so young anymore. It already exists since about, well, nearly 20 years. Yeah. So, and what it means, it actually means what is in the title. We have these, we connect spaces in the city into a green infrastructure. Yeah. And these connections happen within the urban built tissue, but also to the rural hinterland. Yeah. And we use open space in a multifunctional way. We use it environmentally, economically, and socially productive, i.e. we use a sustainability approach. And these spaces will primarily be designed so that they can accommodate food growing, but also other food system activities. When we started this research, my colleague, Professor André Filioun, and myself, it was really important to talk about urban agriculture. As we have heard already, at the moment, the idea of urban and peri-urban has become much more into the forefront. But imagine 20 years ago, starting to think about agriculture in the city, that was the challenge, because everywhere in Europe and across the world, people would say, agriculture, this is a rural affair. We are not talking about that in the city. So now this has changed dramatically. And again, Rita alerted to that just in the overview of where the ideas on food growing in the city came from. And if I hear Shulang talking about urban agriculture now being one of the key issues in urban development in China, one can see how quickly and how fundamentally this development moved on. Yeah, and the last letter in the CPUL concept is the L for landscape. What we always try to design for is an understanding of urban agriculture, of landscape quality in the city, i.e. a connected idea of open space, but also an open space that has the visual qualities of landscape. And that is really interesting in relationship to high intensive, industrial, indoor food production, which often just happens in a box. Yeah. So how does this work with landscape approaches? So that's the concept, very, very briefly. And we have over the years worked on various terminologies and terms that I will only flag up very briefly. There's this idea of essential infrastructure. Let's understand food production and food system activities as an infrastructure in the city. Just as we have road infrastructure, water infrastructure, energy infrastructures, let's also understand food as having an infrastructure in the city. This is one of our sort of claims, ideas, and thinking behind the work. The second is, let's understand landscape, urban landscape, as a space that can can accommodate intensified usages. So several usages can happen in one space, basically overlaid over each other. Leisure, work, production, visual amenity, other identities. So we can intensify landscape by using food production as well. The third, let's also think about that food productive landscape as adding ornament and adding beauty and adding new qualitative dimensions to urban space, which may be unusual because they use an agricultural language, but they may be interesting and exciting and innovative in the city. So 3 more of these keys. Another key to our understanding of these productive urban landscapes is they do help us to produce spaces in the city that people desire to use, i.e. spaces that are green, that are healthy, that are productive in terms of food, but that also allow usage and allow participation. Yeah. Fifth point, one interesting idea, at least in the European climatic concept or Northern Hemisphere concept where our work is based, is that these productive landscapes, they will show seasonality probably more than other landscapes, because depending on climate, different crops will be in different states of bloom. So that adds a temporality to landscape, which we thought is very important and very necessary. And also just referring to this idea of nature and second nature, we all know that in cities, we don't have any nature. 95% of what is green is actually already cultivation. It is a second nature. And working with that idea of the transformed and the cultivated nature also allows us to be inventive about food growing and to accommodate new ways of production and new locations for production, for example. And the last point that comes into our concept is that we do see these productive, continuous productive landscapes as only functioning if the local populations adopt them, if people also start to have productive, active lifestyles, i.e. they take this idea of food production, food system activities into their own lives. And here I see also good connection points to working with history and tradition and historical landscapes. So yes, and key point probably for our session is also the CPOL concept is a green infrastructure concept, just as Rita has mentioned earlier, and Shulang has, for example, done in her idea of the Tian Fu Greenway, which is also an infrastructural concept. So we do see it as an infrastructural concept with the additional benefit that it talks about food, because usually to date, green infrastructure concepts don't talk about food. Yeah, and this is some work which I briefly want to present, where already there is starting collaboration between a Chinese researcher and myself to look at how these green infrastructures can differently be explored in different contexts. You can see a big regional green infrastructure in the United Kingdom, and you can see a very localized green infrastructure in the Shanghai Hutan Park. So the dimensions, the optical and visual qualities, but also the locations can be very different. But again, one of the key ideas is let's introduce food into those infrastructures. Yeah. So another very, very quick run. In my work, we worked in the 1990s just to make the case, what is urban agriculture and why it is important. Yeah. So, and this is what Eva referred to. One can read about it in our first book that presents that concept. Yeah. We then, in the 2000s, spent about 10 years in testing What does it mean for urban space? What does it mean on a domestic scale? What does it mean to integrate urban agriculture on a local city or regional scale? Just testing these spaces and processes. And then we spent the 2010s working with local councils to start designing what urban agriculture in the city could mean, as we did here for the city of Heidelberg in Germany, which did now introduce the idea of productive landscapes into their local planning policies for particular development projects. And now currently, 2020s I call it, the idea is that also to develop food strategies with cities in co-developing processes. And we do this currently for the city of Carthage in Tunisia, which is interesting because we encounter the same climatic problems, climatic differences that we discussed earlier, also in the Chinese context, for example, the lack of water and the importance of water. Yeah. So all of this, I'm happy to go into detail further and later if you have questions. And I want to spend the last few minutes of my talking time to try to relate what I have been saying and working on to the report that Rita has presented. Rita, at the end of her study, which you may have looked at already, she presents us with a challenge. Yeah? And the challenge has been formulated by RUAF, the Research Center of Urban Agriculture, which is one of the most important international knowledge holders and sort of activists, practitioners on urban agriculture. Yeah? And what is important in that challenge is that even though urban agriculture has entered the public domain in a way that we wouldn't have thought 20 years ago, much of the data is still anecdotal and difficult to compare, yeah? Which is exactly what I have been hearing from Shulang's presentation, but also from Rita's presentation. Knowledge is scattered and knowledge depends on case studies and it is difficult to compare. And further, the challenges of assessing the scale and impacts of urban agriculture remain significant. So, whilst we have individual projects and whilst the practices and understanding and acceptance of urban agriculture has risen exponentially over the last 20 years, to really assess the scale and also long-lasting impact of urban agriculture on cities and how cities look and how cities will be developed is still very, very difficult. Yeah. And the last point, which is on a slightly different agenda, is that urban agriculture still has not become institutionalized, meaning that despite us talking about it since 20 years, many cities are just beginning to take it into their policy and planning legislations. This is, for example, an area where I would love to know much more about China, because from what I hear now, since I'm sensitized more to Chinese developments, so probably quite a lot of institutionalization is happening actually now in China, yeah, and I mean furthered by the CAAS and the Institute of Agriculture. So what Rita also tried to extract from her research are what she calls the most relevant issues. And she had described them as urban agriculture in general, and understanding vertical farming, controlled environment agriculture, food policy and urban landscape planning, urban agriculture heritage. From my perspective, I do agree to all of those. I would like to add two. Yeah, I would like to add the productive urban landscape as the green infrastructure in which we can embed a lot of urban agriculture practices, developments, strategies. And then I would also suggest to probably differentiate between building integrated agriculture and the controlled environment agriculture. And now how can thinking conceptually in the way we are doing with our continuous productive landscape concept, how can this help us to respond to those most relevant issues in the following way? Yeah, looking strategically from an urban design and planning focus at urban agriculture. And the CEPOL concept is only an example. There are other urban planning and design approaches. And I think that Shulang's cluster is already practicing quite a few of those. Yeah. But if we are thinking strategically with a planning and design background, what can we do to address this issue, urban agriculture in general? This conceptual thinking may help us to understand the history and types of urban agriculture, but also the relation to the urban food system as a whole. And there I would like to mention as an example, food waste recycling. Yeah, so food waste recycling is one of the under-researched, under-practiced elements of the urban food system, which could be fundamentally important for urban agriculture in general, because it can help recycling, it can help soil production, etc. Yeah, this productive urban landscape, thinking strategically with planning design ideas like the CEPOL idea, helps us to look at toolkits for implementing, because these toolkits for implementing urban agriculture, they exist already. There are quite a few of those available internationally. And also to find indicators, i.e. how do we assess whether urban agriculture projects are successful? And are these successful? Are these successes spatial, environmental, social, and economic? And where are they? Yeah. So the reason why I'm interested in this term building integrated agriculture is because it allows us to only include rooftop farming, yeah, which otherwise somehow it drops off the agenda. And rooftop farming in many cities in the world could be a very, very important addition to other forms of urban agriculture, because many cities have flat roofs. Yeah. And Paris, that Rita has mentioned as an example, for example, has a very important and pioneering green, food productive green rooftop farming program. So, and this goes together with the indoor and outdoor vertical farming and the open and enclosed rooftop farming ideas. That leaves for the controlled environment agriculture the idea of indoor farming, which it usually is. Is this correct? Yeah. And high quality, high intensive farming methods. Again, I agree entirely. Food policy and urban landscape planning are really important issues. Food policy mainly goes via food policy councils. And this is where any comprehensive urban design and planning approaches can also be supportive, because either they are initiating food policy councils, as it happened in Berlin, where I'm one of the co-initiators, coming from an urban design and planning background, or urban design and planning backgrounds are usually nowadays asked when food policies are being developed, because they cover the spatial perspective. And working with local authorities, including planning authorities, this is what in design and planning concepts we usually do. So again, there I can see very good relationships between the crucial issues, but also thinking about them from a planning and design side. Yeah. And the last issue that was raised, urban agriculture heritage, again, I think this captures a whole body of sociological important issues that have to do with food culture and identity. And addressing those issues will make sure that people in urban areas have an interest in that food that will be produced in their areas. And it will just make our urban lives more beautiful and more exciting. So, and integrating these traditional practices, I'm completely aware that some of the key worldwide agricultural heritage practices come from China, but there are also others in Europe, there are others in Germany, and to create exchange, knowledge exchange, practice exchange between the two would be wonderful. Yeah. So, and yeah, I hope that these will be sort of first ideas and reflections on our joint discussions now. And I thank you very much for your attention. Would like to refer back to these two books that Eva Sternfeld mentioned. Yes, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Katrin, for the great comments. And now we have still some time for discussion, and I myself have plenty of questions and comments, and but yeah, as you said or mentioned in your, we see from your presentation that going into this continuous productive urban landscapes that will need a holistic approach. And I guess with a number of administrations involved. And when we first brought up the topic here in our project, and it was said, oh, urban agriculture, that is not our field. And it only came when the Chinese ministry was also much pushing on food security, and maybe then they, yeah, and at that time they also CAAS introduced the Institute for Urban Agriculture. But I guess if we really go for urban agriculture, we need new types of, as you mentioned, that it should be integrated into city planning, into the environmental planning, and what else. And are there any examples already, where good examples in the world where this is successfully implemented, or
maybe I would say in for example Stockholm in Sweden, they have a very city food strategy with 5 components, and it's on the policy level, on the implementation level, on different urban spaces, which is very developed. So Katrin, I don't know if what do you think about that? If I read about it, I have no more information about it, but it seems to be a very good example for that.
Yeah, and food strategies is also in itself an interesting concept. Yeah, so quite a few cities nowadays do have food strategies internationally, even though not many. I wonder whether any Chinese cities have food strategies. Please, I just lose a few more words. So food strategies, they come about in 2 different ways, mainly. Either they are initiated bottom up, and some of the early food strategies did that. Like there is one in Brighton and Hove, where my university is located. Brighton and Hove had one of the first food strategies in the UK, probably in Europe. And that was entirely driven by a bottom-up initiative that wanted to make food more affordable for local residents. So it came from a health and social agenda, and led to the city council finally adopting a strategy that would help it to achieve nutritional, food educational aims. Yeah. Whereas interestingly in Berlin, where there was the Food Policy Council established in 2015 or so, two movements happened in parallel. A food strategy that was pushed and forwarded by local initiative groups and the local council, who very quickly became aware of the energy and the necessity that sits behind food policies, developed their own food policies. So we have this very interesting combination of bottom-up and top-down processes. And so there are quite a few around worldwide food strategies. London has a food strategy since quite a long time, which again is a different model. It's a sort of top-down food strategy, but the Greater London Authority interviewed about 200 different local food initiatives, food experts, researchers, including ourselves, to develop that food strategy. So this is on its way, and the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact gave it an extra boost. So I guess many of you are aware of this outcome. I think the most important outcome of the Milan Expo in 2015 was that initially 100 mayors of world cities signed the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, and they self-obliged themselves to create initiatives, policy, legislation to support food development in the city. And I have just, I saw briefly in the chat that Pan Tao said that one of the key issues is land use and land accessibility in China. So this is the same everywhere, but a food policy could help with that because it can influence planning decisions. So yeah, sorry, that was a quite long answer to this question about food policies, but yes, they are very important. But my last point is, even though many cities have those policies now, there is still a difference between having the policy and implementing it. So this is where there's also a bottleneck at the moment. Yeah.
And maybe there fits quite well the question to Fei Shulang from Michaela Böhme. How does the vegetable basket program comes into play when it comes to urban agriculture? Is this topic?
Yeah, thank you, Michaela, for the question. Yeah, so the vegetable basket program is a very important strategy that is initiated by the national government, and it's actually a kind of leading strategy for all the local implementations regarding vegetable production as well as the vegetable industrial chains. So in Chengdu, it's also a very key policy and strategy the agri-food sector need to follow. And actually in each city in China, they have their own implementation action plans in line with this overall program. And so in Chengdu, we also have I have gone through the action plan a few months ago. Like it includes very many aspects from the production to and the storage of the food to the distribution, processing distribution, like different nodes of the industrial chains. So yeah, it's playing a very important role in the local policy design.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Katrin has raised her hand. Yeah.
Thank you, Shulang. So would you say that this basket program is an urban food strategy?
Not really. It covers the production in all in the areas, I would say. But for urban and peri-urban areas, it's definitely also work to guide their production and all the activities. Like in Chengdu, we have large area of peri-urban agriculture. So based on according to this overall program, we have policies and planning to guide the peri-urban agriculture activities.
Eva, we can't hear you. Your microphone is off.
Sorry, we have them. Yeah, I think I read it in Katrin's book that about 30%, up to 30% of vegetable production could be produced in urban agriculture facilities. Maybe we cannot feed the whole population by urban agriculture, but urban agriculture, at least for example, for vegetables and yeah, green leaves can contribute a lot. But I see now he has been mentioned many times today already. Mr. Pantau, Dr. Pantau, he's from Shanghai, but I know last week we had a phone call. He's at present in Germany, and he brought the German Schrebergarten idea, or the allotment gardens, from Germany to China. And now he's back in Germany to bring back the Chinese idea of Schrebergardens to Germany, I've heard. But Pantau, please, your question or comment.
Yeah, actually, thank you. I have two comments, actually. The first comment, actually, in the past 10 years, I'm the fan of peri-urban agriculture, okay? So we're promoting urban-rural balanced lifestyle, you know. So I like Rita's quoted the definition of urban agriculture, peri-urban agriculture is multifunctional, you know. So not only just food security, but also recreational, educational. This is the past 10 years I have experienced. But I have more important to say that during the COVID lockdown, you know, last year I was in Shanghai with my family, and with another 11 family, we lived in the farm for 2.5 months. You know, this is a treasure of time of us. You know, we don't need to lock down in the city, but we live on farm, liberal, you know, with a lot of food to eat. You know, so this is something, you know, we really treasure. You know. And also, we're just talking about this artificial intelligence, you know, AI is coming, you know, in the next 10 years, I think there will be a lot of people in the city have no job to do because they were replaced by AI, you know. But what meaning of life? The city people need to do something, you know. So this morning we are chatting on our WeChat platform, you know. So maybe the farmer, the urban farming, you know, people become a kind of a social farmer can be a solution for the future, you know, if AI replace human jobs, you know. I mean, so this is a lot of things we can think about it, jump out of box, you know, think about the future. So this is the comments I would like to make. Yeah, thank you.
So, are there? Yeah, okay, then we invite my colleague Ahmadjan has a question. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Eva. And I was quite inspired by all the talks. I have a question for all the panelists, or maybe some others also can address. I'm also a great fan of urban farming, but we know the real estate price in cities are relatively more expensive than urban areas. So how do we make urban farming more attractive or cost-effective option, not only for very rich upper-class people who may be drawn to this organic farming, maybe these kind of very hippie ideas, but can we make it also accessible to middle class or ordinary people? So in this case, is it really competitive with rural areas, and how do we really achieve that urban farming is accessible for everyone? This is my first question. My second question, also because of climate change, we know cities have very strong built infrastructure like cements. So because of that, especially after big rain, there was like a problem of urban flooding. So there's a concept of sponge cities to make city soil or city surfaces more adapted to climate change or to absorb these rainwater. So how do we integrate this concept of sponge city and make cities more have a stronger water retention ability with urban farming or urban agriculture? Yeah, thank you.
Maybe Eva, your microphone.
Yeah. Who wants to answer? Yeah.
So maybe I will answer to your first question about the competitiveness of those urban farming systems. As I introduced in my presentation in the study, the meta-analysis study of Paya, and they found out in terms of productivity, they are, for some categories, it's already, it has been proved that there are much higher yields than conventional farming. So in terms of, but what is, I think, missing in this study, it was done in 2000, it was published in 2020. It's about the cost, aspects of energy, rising energy costs, and all those climate change aspect. It is not taking into consideration about this higher yields, about this about is it really competitive. So this, I think, this needs more understanding, and but definitely I think for some crops it is interesting. Then the question on the land use on very rare urban spaces to grow those vegetables, for example. Well, then we come back to food policies and food strategies of cities. What are their priorities? How do they want, and how do we want to feed people tomorrow? It's a question about political vision and about political political will, I would say. So now I see that this is what I wanted to answer for your first question. So Katrin, maybe you have more information to add. Katrin, you have micro.
Yeah. All these questions, I always or often feel they are so complex that it is difficult to think about. Yeah. And yet the answer to the question by DCZ Ahmedjan, the answer to Ahmedjan's question, I think, lies in Pantau's comments. Yeah. So, but it's so complex that this is always very, very difficult to think about and formulate. I do also agree that the big benefit of urban agriculture lies in its multifunctionality. And in the multifunctionality, the social dimension and the life quality dimension is one that cannot be underestimated. And if one is thinking about urban or peri-urban food production or other food system activities in this way, the question of competitiveness is being asked differently. In fact, this is how the urban agriculture discourse started in the 1990s. Because in the 1990s, when also we ourselves tried to make the case for urban agriculture, this is what we try to look at. I mean, as architects, in an overview sense, not in detail, what are the co-benefits of reintroducing food system activities into cities? And there are many. There is, for example, a health benefit. So people would do more outdoor activities and they would go into their gardens, yeah, and they would stay healthier, which means a big burden on health costs for social services will be reduced because, I mean, Europe, I'm sorry also for our Chinese participants. All my background, my references are usually European and Northern American. Yeah, so, but in Europe, there's a big problem with, for example, heart disease and obesity. Yeah, issues like healthy eating and being outdoors could help with those. Yeah, so these are exemplary co-benefits that one must take into account if, for example, a planning department is deciding what do we do with a particular piece of land. Are we using it for a productive urban landscape, or are we using it to build another petrol station or another supermarket? Yeah. So these issues, I think, to interconnect them is really important. And what also will become very important, I do think, is this building integrated agriculture, i.e. using buildings on top, on the sides, below, within, using buildings for different types of food production, because open space in the city, with cities becoming denser and more people moving into them, yeah, there's a limit. Yeah. So now I have already been talking so much again, but I wanted also to say, I read in Rita's report about the Ecoland Club Farm, and as a concept, I find this really interesting. And also for me, I would like to know more about that. That is a new way of it's a new, for me, a new type of urban agricultural space use. If at some other time, maybe we have a bit more time, I would like to discuss that in more detail.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. We are running out of time. I think, yeah, Katrin, when you will have the opportunity come to China, Dr. Pantau will welcome you at the Schrebergarten in Shanghai. We made also a short movie. I think it's on our website, or is it uploaded yet? No, still not. About this project, and there is more projects in China. Yeah, maybe next time we will invite also Pantau to introduce more about his projects.